There is something unsettling about attraction. Not the kind you see in movies or filtered through romantic music, but the quiet, almost invisible force that pulls people together without logic, without permission, and often without awareness. You think you are choosing who you like. You think you are in control. But what if that feeling, that pull, is not as conscious as you believe? What if much of attraction is driven by hidden psychological mechanisms that operate beneath your awareness, shaping your desires before you even realize they exist? Pause for a moment and think about this. Why do some people instantly captivate you while others, equally kind or attractive on paper, leave you completely indifferent? Why do we sometimes become obsessed with individuals who treat us inconsistently, even poorly? And why does the human brain seem wired to crave what it cannot fully have? These are not random emotional accidents. They are patterns. And science has been slowly uncovering them. At the core of attraction lies the brain's reward system, particularly the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine is not just about pleasure. It is about anticipation. Research from neuroscience labs, including studies conducted at Stanford University, shows that dopamine spikes not when we receive a reward, but when we expect one. This distinction is crucial. It means that uncertainty, not certainty, fuels desire. When someone is predictable, always available, always responding in the same way, the brain quickly adapts and reduces its dopamine response. But when someone is inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, the brain becomes alert. It starts chasing the reward. This is where the so-called dark psychology begins to emerge. Intermittent reinforcement, a concept well documented in behavioral psychology, explains why unpredictable rewards create stronger attachment than consistent ones. It is the same principle that makes gambling addictive. Slot machines do not reward you every time. They reward you randomly. And that randomness keeps you hooked. In human relationships, the same mechanism can quietly take hold. A message that arrives after hours of silence feels more powerful than one that comes instantly. A rare compliment carries more weight than constant praise. The brain interprets unpredictability as value. But attraction is not just about chemistry. It is also about perception and social signaling. Humans are deeply influenced by what psychologists call perceived scarcity. When something appears limited or difficult to obtain, its perceived value increases. This is not a conscious calculation. It is an evolutionary shortcut. In ancestral environments, scarce resources were often more valuable for survival. That same wiring now applies to people. Someone who seems selective, who does not give attention easily, is often perceived as more desirable. Studies published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology have shown that individuals who appear hard to get are often rated as more attractive, but only under specific conditions. The key is that their selectiveness must feel intentional, not dismissive. If someone is perceived as rejecting everyone equally, they lose appeal. But if they are perceived as choosing carefully, their desirability increases. This subtle difference reveals something important. Attraction is not just about who someone is. It is about the story your brain constructs about them. And then there is familiarity, one of the most paradoxical forces in attraction. The mere exposure effect, first documented by psychologist Robert Zajonc, demonstrates that repeated exposure to a person increases our liking for them, even if we are not consciously aware of it. This is why people often develop feelings for coworkers, classmates, or individuals they see regularly. The brain equates familiarity with safety. But here is where it becomes complex. Too much familiarity can reduce excitement, while too little prevents emotional connection. Attraction thrives in the tension between the known and the unknown. When you begin to see these patterns, attraction starts to look less like magic and more like a system. A system shaped by evolution, reinforced by neurochemistry, and influenced by subtle psychological cues. And yet, despite understanding it, we are still deeply affected by it. Because these mechanisms are not external tricks. They are embedded within us. The real question is not whether these forces exist. The real question is how they shape your choices without you realizing it. Because once you understand that attraction is not entirely under your conscious control, something shifts. You start to see your feelings differently. You begin to question them. And that is where the deeper, darker layers of attraction begin to unfold. There is a pattern that quietly repeats itself in human relationships, and once you see it, it becomes difficult to ignore. People are often drawn not to what is healthy, stable, or kind, but to what is emotionally intense, uncertain, and sometimes even painful. This is not a flaw in character. It is a reflection of how the human mind has been shaped by past experiences, especially those formed early in life. Attraction does not begin in adulthood. It is built, layer by layer, through childhood interactions, emotional conditioning, and the subtle ways we learn to receive love. Psychologists refer to this as attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. Their research revealed that the way we bond with caregivers in early life forms a template for how we connect with others later on. If love was consistent, safe, and predictable, the brain learns to associate closeness with security. But if love was inconsistent, conditional, or emotionally distant, the brain learns something very different. It learns that love is something to be earned. This is where the darker side of attraction begins to take shape. When someone grows up in an environment where affection is unpredictable, the brain becomes wired to associate emotional highs and lows with connection. Calm, stable relationships may feel unfamiliar, even boring. But intensity, even when it includes anxiety or pain, feels strangely compelling. The brain is not seeking happiness in the way we consciously understand it. It is seeking familiarity. Research in developmental psychology has shown that individuals with anxious attachment styles are more likely to pursue partners who are emotionally unavailable. This creates a dynamic that reinforces itself. The more distant one person becomes, the more the other seeks closeness. The cycle intensifies. And within that cycle, dopamine continues to spike, not because the relationship is fulfilling, but because it is uncertain. This explains why people sometimes become deeply attached to someone who does not treat them well. It is not simply low self-esteem or poor judgment. It is a learned emotional pattern, reinforced by neurochemical rewards. The brain confuses emotional intensity with emotional importance. But there is another layer to this. Attraction is also influenced by something psychologists call projection. We do not just see people as they are. We see them as we imagine them to be. When you are drawn to someone, your mind begins to fill in the gaps. It constructs a version of that person based on your desires, your needs, and your internal narratives. This is why early stages of attraction can feel so powerful. You are not just responding to who they are. You are responding to who your mind believes they could be. This process is closely linked to what neuroscience describes as the brain's predictive coding system. The brain is constantly trying to make sense of incomplete information. It creates predictions, then updates them based on new input. In relationships, this means that when someone is ambiguous or emotionally inconsistent, your brain works harder to interpret them. That mental effort increases engagement. You think about them more. You analyze their behavior. You become invested. Clarity, on the other hand, reduces that mental loop. When someone is straightforward, when their intentions are clear, the brain has less to solve. And while that may sound like a good thing, it often leads to a decrease in obsessive thinking. This is one reason why people sometimes lose interest when everything becomes too certain. It is not that certainty is unattractive. It is that the brain no longer receives the same level of stimulation. There is also the influence of social validation. Humans are deeply social creatures, and our sense of attraction is often shaped by how others perceive someone. Studies have shown that individuals who are desired by others are often rated as more attractive, a phenomenon known as mate choice copying. When you see that others value someone, your brain interprets that as a signal of quality. This effect can amplify attraction beyond what you would feel independently. All of these forces operate quietly, beneath conscious awareness. They shape who you notice, who you desire, and who you struggle to let go of. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. Even when you understand these patterns, you are not immune to them. Awareness does not instantly break the cycle. But it does give you something powerful. It gives you the ability to pause, to question whether what you feel is genuine connection or conditioned response, to ask whether the intensity you are experiencing is a sign of compatibility or a reflection of unresolved patterns. And in that pause, there is the possibility of change. Because the dark psychology of attraction is not about manipulation alone. It is about understanding the hidden forces that shape human desire. And once you begin to see them clearly, you are no longer completely controlled by them. There is a reason why some people seem to command attention the moment they enter a room, while others, equally intelligent or attractive, remain unnoticed. It is not always about appearance. It is about perception, and more specifically, how the human brain interprets signals of value, mystery, and control. Attraction is not just felt. It is constructed in real time, shaped by subtle cues that most people never consciously detect. One of the most powerful of these cues is mystery. The human brain is designed to resolve uncertainty. When information is incomplete, the mind does not stay neutral. It begins to fill in the gaps. This is known in psychology as the Zeigarnik effect, where unfinished or unresolved information occupies more mental space than completed information. When a person reveals everything about themselves immediately, there is nothing left for the brain to process. But when they reveal themselves gradually, selectively, they create cognitive tension. That tension keeps them present in your thoughts long after the interaction ends. Mystery, however, is not about being distant or cold. It is about controlled transparency. It is the ability to share enough to create connection, while holding back enough to sustain curiosity. Studies in social psychology suggest that people who disclose personal information at a moderate, paced rate are perceived as more attractive than those who either overshare or remain completely closed off. The balance creates engagement. It invites the other person to invest mentally and emotionally. Closely tied to mystery is the concept of status. Not necessarily wealth or fame, but perceived social value. Humans have evolved to be highly sensitive to social hierarchies. In ancestral environments, aligning with high-status individuals often meant better access to resources and protection. That instinct still operates today, though it expresses itself in more subtle ways. Confidence, composure, and social proof all signal status to the brain. Research from evolutionary psychology shows that confidence is often interpreted as competence, even when no direct evidence is present. This is known as the confidence heuristic. When someone speaks with certainty, maintains strong eye contact, and appears emotionally self-contained, the brain assumes they possess value. This assumption can significantly increase attraction, even before any deeper qualities are revealed. But here is where the darker layer emerges. Perceived status is not always authentic. It can be constructed, exaggerated, or strategically displayed. Social media has amplified this effect, allowing individuals to curate an image of their lives that signals desirability. When people see others surrounded by attention, admiration, or perceived success, their attraction can increase, not because of genuine connection, but because of perceived value. And then there is control, perhaps the most understated yet influential factor in attraction. Control is not about dominance in the traditional sense. It is about emotional regulation. The ability to remain composed, to not react impulsively, to not chase validation. When someone appears emotionally stable and self-sufficient, they signal that they are not dependent on others for their sense of worth. This independence is deeply attractive because it suggests strength and security. At the same time, control creates asymmetry. When one person is more emotionally invested than the other, the dynamic shifts. The person who is less reactive often holds more influence in the interaction. This is not a conscious strategy in most cases, but it can become one. People who understand this dynamic may intentionally regulate their responses, delay communication, or limit emotional expression to maintain perceived value. This is where attraction begins to blur into strategy. Not necessarily manipulation in a malicious sense, but a calculated awareness of how human psychology operates. The danger lies in losing authenticity. When attraction becomes a game of signals and responses, it can disconnect from genuine connection. People begin to respond not to who someone is, but to how they are being perceived. And yet, despite this complexity, the system works because it aligns with how the brain processes social information. We are drawn to what stimulates us mentally, what signals value, and what challenges our expectations. Mystery keeps the mind engaged. Status signals importance. Control suggests stability. Together, they form a powerful combination that can amplify attraction far beyond surface-level traits. But understanding this is only half the story. Because the deeper question remains. If attraction can be influenced, shaped, and even engineered through these psychological mechanisms, what does that mean for authenticity? What does it mean for real connection? That question leads us into the final layer, where attraction is no longer just about desire, but about awareness, choice, and the possibility of breaking patterns that no longer serve us. At some point, if you look closely enough, attraction begins to lose its mystery and reveal something far more unsettling. What once felt like instinct starts to look like conditioning. What once felt like chemistry begins to resemble patterns repeating themselves with different faces. And in that moment, a quiet but powerful question emerges. If so much of attraction is shaped by unconscious forces, then how much of it is truly yours? The answer is not simple, but it is not hopeless either. Awareness is where everything begins to shift. Neuroscience has consistently shown that bringing unconscious patterns into conscious awareness activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and self-regulation. In other words, the moment you become aware of a pattern, you are no longer entirely controlled by it. You create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, there is choice. But awareness alone is not enough. Because these patterns are not just thoughts. They are emotional imprints, reinforced over years, sometimes decades. They live in the nervous system, not just the mind. This is why people often say they understand their patterns, yet still feel pulled toward the same types of relationships. The body remembers what the mind tries to override. To truly shift attraction, the brain must begin to associate safety with something new. This is where many people struggle. Healthy, emotionally available individuals often feel less exciting at first. There is less uncertainty, less emotional volatility, less of the dopamine-driven highs that come from unpredictability. And because of that, the brain may initially interpret stability as a lack of chemistry. But this is not a lack of attraction. It is a recalibration. Longitudinal studies in relationship psychology, including research from institutions like the Gottman Institute, have shown that long-term relationship satisfaction is not driven by intensity, but by consistency, emotional attunement, and mutual respect. The relationships that endure are not the ones that feel like emotional roller coasters, but the ones that create a sense of psychological safety over time. This kind of attraction grows differently. It deepens rather than spikes. It stabilizes rather than fluctuates. The challenge is that modern environments often amplify the opposite signals. Social media, fast-paced dating culture, and constant exposure to curated images of desirability reinforce the idea that attraction should be immediate, intense, and consuming. This creates a distorted baseline. When something feels calm and grounded, it can seem underwhelming by comparison. But the brain is adaptable. Through repeated exposure and conscious choice, it can begin to redefine what it finds attractive. This process is known in psychology as neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Each time you choose a response that aligns with long-term well-being rather than short-term emotional intensity, you strengthen a different pathway. Over time, what once felt unfamiliar begins to feel natural. There is also a deeper layer to this transformation. It involves identity. Attraction is not just about who you are drawn to. It is about who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who must earn love, you will be drawn to situations where love feels conditional. If you see yourself as someone who is inherently worthy of respect and consistency, your attraction patterns begin to shift accordingly. This is not about forcing yourself to like different people. It is about aligning your internal beliefs with the kind of connection you truly want. When that alignment happens, attraction becomes less chaotic. It becomes more intentional. And perhaps this is the most important realization of all. The dark psychology of attraction is not inherently negative. It is simply a reflection of how the human mind has evolved to seek, interpret, and respond to connection. The danger lies not in these mechanisms themselves, but in remaining unaware of them. Because when you are unaware, you are reactive. You follow patterns without questioning them. You confuse intensity with compatibility. You chase what stimulates you, even when it does not sustain you. But when you are aware, something changes. You begin to observe your own reactions. You recognize the difference between what feels familiar and what is actually healthy. You start to see attraction not as something that happens to you, but as something you can understand and ultimately influence. And that does not make attraction less meaningful. It makes it more honest. Because real connection is not built on illusion, unpredictability, or psychological triggers alone. It is built on presence, understanding, and the willingness to see another person clearly, without projection, without distortion. The question is no longer why you feel what you feel. The question is whether you are willing to look at it closely enough to choose differently. And in that choice, there is something far more powerful than attraction. There is freedom.